The hustle and bustle of Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with energy as passengers hurried to their gates. Among the throng, flight attendants ushered travelers toward Flight 317 bound for Tokyo Narita. The air crackled with excitement, the promise of adventure hanging thick as business professionals, casual vacationers, and seasoned globetrotters mingled at the boarding area. The long journey across the Pacific was about to begin, and for some, it would be unforgettable. Among the passengers was Oliver Bennett, a brash, self-assured tech entrepreneur whose software startup had recently achieved $1 billion valuation. With his tailored suit, designer luggage, and air of superiority, Oliver embodied the stereotype of a man who believed he had arrived. He exuded confidence, his inflated ego reinforced by constant praise from his online followers and his position in the tech world. In his mind, he was destined to shape the future, a visionary among mere mortals. As Oliver stepped into the plush first-class cabin, he felt at home among the luxury of reclining seats, ambient lighting, and endless champagne. Seat 2A would be his domain for the next 12 hours. When a man in plain attire, a hoodie, sneakers, and a baseball cap pulled low, quietly slid into Seat 2B, Oliver barely acknowledged him. The contrast between their appearances was stark, and Oliver's assumption was immediate. This man was a nobody, undeserving of the opulence surrounding them. What Oliver didn't know was that the unassuming traveler beside him was none other than Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur behind SpaceX and Tesla, a man renowned for his audacious ideas and relentless pursuit of innovation. What unfolded over the course of the flight would be a humbling experience, altering Oliver's perspective in ways he could never have anticipated. Oliver's entrance into first class was nothing short of theatrical. Draped in confidence and luxury, he handed off his tailored blazer to the flight attendant with a subtle yet unmistakable air of superiority. His every movement seemed calculated to draw attention as he settled into Seat 2A, his personal throne for the next 12 hours. Reclining his chair and setting up his state-of-the-art noise-canceling headphones, Oliver surveyed the cabin with the practiced eye of a man who believed himself to be the most important person in the room. To him, first class wasn't just a privilege. It was his rightful domain. His neighbor, however, arrived without fanfare. The man slid into Seat 2B almost unnoticed, clad in a simple hoodie, well-worn sneakers, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The contrast between the two passengers could not have been starker. Oliver barely spared him a glance, dismissing the figure as a nobody, someone clearly out of place amidst the opulence of first class. Appearances mattered to Oliver, and this man didn't fit the image of success that Oliver respected. Their interaction began with polite indifference. Evening, the man offered casually as he adjusted his seat. Oliver, busy organizing his laptop and other gadgets, muttered a distracted "yes, sure," without looking up. He had more pressing matters on his mind, like composing his next tweet for his 500,000 followers, an audience he felt needed constant reminders of his brilliance. As the plane reached cruising altitude and the cabin settled into a quiet hum, Oliver's focus shifted back to his surroundings. He couldn't help but notice the quiet confidence of the man in Seat 2B. Something about him felt oddly familiar, though Oliver couldn't place why. The man's understated demeanor stood in stark contrast to Oliver's larger-than-life personality. This quiet presence began to gnaw at Oliver's curiosity. The man's choice of water over the offered champagne was another irritant to Oliver. To him, it signaled a lack of appreciation for the finer things in life. "Water, really?" Oliver muttered under his breath, loud enough to be heard but subtle enough to feign innocence. The man gave a faint smile but said nothing, his calm silence only adding to the intrigue. Oliver's curiosity began to morph into irritation. Used to commanding attention and dominating conversations, he found the man's refusal to engage deeply unsettling. Still, Oliver couldn't resist probing further. Leaning back with a confident grin, he finally broke the silence. "So, what do you do?" he asked, his tone dripping with the kind of interest that wasn't genuine. The man glanced up briefly, his face still obscured by the brim of his cap. "I'm in tech," he replied simply, his tone giving nothing away. Oliver's grin widened. "Ah, tech. Same here," he said, leaning forward slightly as if to establish a connection. "Bet we've got some war stories to share," he added, fully intending to steer the conversation toward his own accomplishments. But the man didn't take the bait. Instead, he nodded politely and returned to scrolling on his phone, leaving Oliver's attempt at camaraderie hanging in the air. And used to being ignored, Oliver's irritation grew. His natural need to dominate any room, or in this case, any cabin, was met with an immovable wall of indifference. Determined to assert himself, Oliver leaned in again, this time raising his voice slightly to catch the attention of nearby passengers. "You know," he began, "the tech world is full of people who get way too much credit for half-baked ideas." He paused, waiting for a reaction that didn't come. "Take Elon Musk, for example," Oliver continued, his tone dripping with derision. "Everyone's so busy calling him a genius, they forget how reckless he is." For the first time, the man in 2B paused. His finger hovered over his phone screen, but he didn't look up. Encouraged by what he perceived as an opening, Oliver pressed on. "SpaceX? Sure, it's impressive if you like throwing billions at exploding rockets. Tesla? Overrated. And don't even get me started on Twitter. That whole takeover was a disaster." A faint chuckle escaped from the man in 2B, almost imperceptible, but it lit a fire in Oliver. Leaning forward, he smirked. "You think I'm wrong?" he challenged. The man finally looked up slightly, though the shadow of his cap still shielded much of his face. "No," he said calmly, his voice almost amused. "I think you're passionate." Oliver frowned, unsure if it was a compliment or an insult. "Passionate? I call it realistic. People like Musk, they just ride the wave of hype, nothing more. Real innovators like me. We're the ones building the future, not blowing hot air." The man offered a polite smile and returned to his phone, leaving Oliver stewing in his own words. Little did Oliver know, the quiet demeanor of his seatmate wasn't ignorance. It was restraint. Oliver's need for attention soon got the better of him. He couldn't resist turning to his unassuming neighbor in seat 2B, initiating conversation under the guise of casual interest. "What do you do?" Oliver asked, his tone laced with false camaraderie. The man looked up briefly, his cap still shading much of his face. "I'm in tech," he replied simply, his voice steady but unassuming. He didn't elaborate, leaving a pregnant pause in the air. For Oliver, this was an invitation to dominate the conversation. "Ah, tech," he exclaimed, leaning back with a grin that screamed self-importance. "Same here. But we've got some war stories to share." His voice carried just enough volume to catch the attention of nearby passengers. He glanced around, pleased to see a few heads turning. The man in 2B offered a polite nod, but didn't engage further, returning his focus to his phone. This quiet dismissal only fueled Oliver's need to assert himself. The silence, instead of being a deterrent, acted like a green light for Oliver's ego. "You know," he began, his voice loud enough to fill the cabin, "the tech world is full of people who get way too much credit for half-baked ideas." He paused, as if allowing his words to sink in. "Take Elon Musk, for example," Oliver continued, his tone dripping with derision. "Everyone's so busy calling him a genius, they forget how reckless he is." The man in 2B didn't react, though his finger hovered momentarily over his phone screen. Encouraged by the apparent lack of pushback, Oliver pressed on. "SpaceX? Sure, it's impressive if you like throwing billions at exploding rockets. Tesla? Overrated. And don't even get me started on Twitter. That whole takeover? A complete disaster." A faint chuckle escaped from the man in 2B. It was almost imperceptible, but it lit a fire in Oliver. He leaned forward, his grin widening. "You think I'm wrong?" he challenged, his voice carrying a sharp edge. The man's head tilted slightly, though the shadow of his cap still obscured much of his face. His tone was calm, almost amused. No, he said simply. I think you're passionate. Oliver frowned, unsure if the comment was a compliment or a subtle jab. Either way, he wasn't about to let it slide. Passionate? I call it realistic. People like Musk, they just ride the wave of hype, nothing more. Real innovators like me. We're the ones building the future, not blowing hot air. The man in 2B offered another faint smile and returned to his phone, his quiet demeanor exuding a confidence that only irritated Oliver further. And used to being ignored, Oliver's irritation grew. His natural need to dominate any room, or in this case, any cabin, was met with an immovable wall of indifference. Determined to assert himself, he leaned in again, his voice rising slightly to ensure the surrounding passengers could hear. Let me guess, he said, his tone dripping with mock curiosity. You're one of those crypto guys? Or maybe AI? Everyone's jumping on those bandwagons these days. The man finally looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. Not exactly, he said, offering no further explanation. The ambiguity only fueled Oliver's frustration. He thrived on being the center of attention, and the man's refusal to engage was an affront to his ego. Shifting in his seat, Oliver decided to take another jab. So what's your take on Musk? He asked, his voice sharper now. I mean, if you're in tech, you must have an opinion. The man hesitated for a moment before shrugging. He's done some interesting things. Interesting things? Oliver repeated, laughing derisively. That's the understatement of the century. The guy's a walking contradiction, preaching about saving the planet while flying private jets, hyping up Mars while barely addressing the problems here on Earth. It's all theory until you're the one footing the bill. For the first time, a flicker of something crossed the man's face. Amusement, perhaps, or mild irritation. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Maybe he's just doing what he thinks is best, the man replied, his tone neutral. Ha! What he thinks is best, Oliver scoffed, spoken like someone who's never actually dealt with real-world consequences. Look, it's all smoke and mirrors. People like me, we're the real innovators, building practical solutions for everyday problems, not chasing pipe dreams. The man said nothing, his silence once again infuriating Oliver. The surrounding passengers, who had subtly tuned into the conversation, exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and secondhand embarrassment. Unbeknownst to Oliver, his every word was being absorbed by the very man he was mocking. Elon Musk adjusted his cap slightly, hiding a faint smile. His restraint was not ignorance. It was deliberate. The critique unfolding beside him was as revealing as it was misguided, and Elon saw no need to correct the trajectory just yet. As dinner was served and the hours ticked by, Oliver couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in the flight attendants' behavior. While they maintained their professionalism, there was a marked difference in how they addressed his seatmate in 2B. One attendant, in particular, leaned in with a tone of deference, addressing him as sir with an emphasis that made Oliver's curiosity spike. Who was this man? By now, Oliver's earlier arrogance had started to give way to genuine intrigue. Leaning forward slightly, he couldn't help but ask, "All right, I give up. What's your deal? Some venture capitalist? A trust fund kid?" His tone carried a mix of mockery and genuine interest. The man chuckled softly but gave no answer, instead reaching for his glass of water. This nonchalance only irritated Oliver more, his curiosity now demanding satisfaction. Just as Oliver opened his mouth to press further, a flight attendant approached their row, her demeanor markedly respectful. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk," she said with a professional smile. "Your connection in Tokyo has been confirmed. The arrangements for your transfer are ready." Oliver froze. The words hung in the air, refusing to fully register. "Mr. Musk?" His mind raced as he tried to piece together the clues. The understated attire, the quiet confidence, the deferential treatment from the staff. The realization hit him like a freight train. He had spent hours sitting beside and openly mocking none other than Elon Musk. one of the most influential figures in the tech world and a man he had labeled a walking PR stunt. Elon Musk, meanwhile, acknowledged the flight attendant with a polite nod and a warm thank you. He adjusted his cap slightly, revealing more of his unmistakable face. The man Oliver had so casually berated was none other than the CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and a litany of other groundbreaking ventures. For the first time that flight, Oliver was utterly speechless. His mind replayed every word he'd said, every critique and smug comment about Musk's companies and ventures. Humiliation washed over him in waves. He felt the weight of his own ignorance, the irony of his loud critiques delivered directly to the subject of his disdain. Elon, on the other hand, appeared entirely unfazed. He returned to his book, his calm demeanor exuding an air of restraint that only made Oliver's discomfort more acute. The surrounding passengers, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, now exchanged knowing glances. Their expressions ranged from amusement to secondhand embarrassment, and Oliver could feel every one of them. Desperate to salvage the situation, Oliver cleared his throat. I didn't realize, he stammered, his bravado crumbling. I didn't mean any of it personally. Just talking, you know? Elon's eyes flicked toward him, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he offered a small smile. Don't worry, he said lightly. I don't take it personally. The words were simple, but they carried an undeniable weight. Oliver felt a mix of relief and further humiliation. He had expected anger or defensiveness, but the lack of either only magnified his own pettiness. Scrambling to regain some semblance of dignity, Oliver tried to change the subject. You're probably used to people criticizing you, right? Comes with the territory, he ventured, his tone attempting to convey camaraderie. Elon leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Criticism can be useful, he replied, as long as it's constructive. Was yours constructive? Oliver's face burned. Well, I mean, I didn't know I was talking to you, obviously. Elon's smile widened just slightly, but his tone remained measured. Does it matter who you're talking to? If the points are valid, they stand regardless of the audience. The response left Oliver momentarily stunned. For all his bravado, he had no comeback. Elon's words were not delivered in anger or arrogance, but with the quiet confidence of someone who understood the bigger picture. You mentioned Tesla, Elon continued, his voice calm but deliberate. Do you know how many lives have been saved by our driver assistance technology? How many accidents have been prevented? Oliver shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I guess I hadn't looked at it that way. And SpaceX, Elon added, his gaze unwavering. You called it reckless. Did you know our rockets have reduced the cost of access to space by over 90%? That we're working on technology that could one day protect humanity from extinction-level events? Oliver opened his mouth to respond but found no words. The weight of Elon's accomplishments contrasted sharply with his earlier dismissive comments. Elon's tone softened slightly as he continued. As for Twitter, yes, it's chaotic. But sometimes chaos is necessary for change. Ideas evolve through friction. Without it, there's no progress. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Elon's words weren't defensive. They were factual, delivered with a clarity that left no room for argument. Oliver swallowed hard, his earlier confidence completely shattered. As the flight neared its destination, Oliver leaned over hesitantly. Mr. Musk, he whispered, his voice low enough not to disturb the quiet cabin. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I was out of line. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I can't imagine the weight of doing what you do. Elon studied him for a moment, then nodded. Apology accepted, he said simply. The truth doesn't change based on who's listening. Maybe next time, consider that before you speak. The words weren't harsh, but they carried a profound impact. For the remainder of the flight, Oliver sat quietly, reflecting on the humbling encounter. It wasn't just about being wrong. It was about learning to respect the challenges and achievements of others before passing judgment. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, the shimmering city lights below painted a breathtaking view. But Oliver Bennett barely noticed. His thoughts churned, each one returning to the man sitting beside him, breaking the silence. Oliver leaned over slightly, his voice low and sincere. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy with genuine regret. "It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but I can't imagine the weight of doing what you do." Elon Musk turned to meet his gaze. There was no anger, no smugness in his expression, just a calm acceptance that seemed to cut deeper than any rebuke. He nodded slightly, his voice steady and composed. "The truth doesn't change based on who's listening," he said, "but progress always meets resistance. The key is to keep moving forward." The simplicity of the statement struck Oliver. It wasn't just advice. It was a philosophy forged from years of navigating criticism, failures, and relentless innovation. For the first time, Oliver felt truly humbled. His earlier bravado now seemed small and shallow in comparison to the quiet determination of the man beside him. As the plane landed and taxied to the gate, the usual bustle of disembarkation began. Oliver watched as Elon gathered his belongings, his movements unhurried, his demeanor unchanged. Flanked by discreet airport personnel, Elon Musk disappeared into the crowd, blending seamlessly despite his unmistakable presence. It was a stark reminder of how visionaries often operate, in plain sight, yet always steps ahead. Left behind in the first-class cabin, Oliver lingered for a moment longer. Reflecting on the flight, he realized how easy it was to pass judgment on those striving to push boundaries. His criticisms of Elon Musk had been born of ignorance and arrogance, a toxic combination that masked his own insecurities. The flight wasn't just a moment of embarrassment for him. It was a wake-up call. As he moved through the bustling terminal, Oliver replayed the conversation in his mind. He thought about Elon's words, each one resonating more profoundly now than they had in the moment. The challenges of innovation, the inevitability of resistance, the courage to keep moving forward. These were not just platitudes, but truths that defined Elon's life and work. Oliver couldn't help but reflect on his own journey. His startup's recent success had inflated his ego, blinding him to the bigger picture. He had equated success with validation, using it as a shield to deflect criticism and inflate his own sense of importance. But sitting beside Elon Musk had shattered that illusion. True success wasn't about accolades or valuations. It was about resilience, purpose, and the willingness to risk everything for something greater than yourself. The encounter also made Oliver confront an uncomfortable truth about himself. How many times had he dismissed others with casual arrogance? How often had he criticized without understanding? The flight had forced him to face his own shortcomings, and while the realization was painful, it was also liberating. He had been given a rare opportunity to learn, and he resolved not to waste it. Back at his hotel that evening, Oliver found himself jotting down notes, a habit he had neglected since his early days as an entrepreneur. The lessons from the flight poured onto the page, each one a reminder of the humility and perspective he needed to cultivate moving forward. He scribbled words like respect, understanding, and empathy, underlining them as if to cement their importance. By the time Oliver turned out the lights, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The experience with Elon Musk hadn't just changed the way he viewed the billionaire. It had changed the way he viewed himself. He realized that the world didn't need more critics. It needed builders, thinkers, and doers. People willing to challenge the status quo, not for personal gain, but for the betterment of others. As he boarded his connecting flight the next morning, Oliver carried with him a newfound humility. He wasn't the same man who had strutted onto the plane in Los Angeles, brimming with arrogance and self-importance. He was, for the first time in a long while, a student, eager to learn, to grow, and to contribute in a meaningful way. The lesson was clear. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but the real challenge lies in stepping into the arena. It's about understanding the weight of leadership, the courage it takes to dream big, and the resilience required to see those dreams through. For Oliver, the encounter with Elon Musk was more than a humbling moment. It was a turning point, and as he looked out over the city below, he felt a quiet determination to follow through on the lessons he had learned. Because progress always meets resistance, but the key is to keep moving forward. Oliver stepped off the flight, a changed man. What had started as an ordinary journey had transformed into an experience that reshaped his understanding of success, humility, and progress. The lesson was clear. True innovation requires courage, resilience, and the ability to withstand criticism. For years, Oliver had critiqued from the sidelines, believing that his voice carried authority. Yet sitting beside Elon Musk had exposed the fragility of that belief. Elon's calm responses and quiet confidence were not just reflections of his personality, but a testament to the strength it took to navigate relentless scrutiny. The truth doesn't change based on who's listening, Elon had said. The words echoed in Oliver's mind as he walked through the terminal. They weren't just a defense against criticism, but a guiding principle for anyone brave enough to challenge the status quo. Reflecting on the flight, Oliver realized how easy it was to judge visionaries without fully understanding the scope of their challenges. He had dismissed Elon's work as hype, failing to recognize the profound impact of his endeavors. Tesla wasn't just about cars. It was about safety and sustainability. SpaceX wasn't reckless. It was a leap toward humanity's survival. Even Twitter, chaotic as it seemed, was a platform for the friction that fueled change. As for Elon Musk, he continued on his journey, unfazed by the interaction. Just another day in the life of a man shaping the future. For Oliver, however, the encounter left a lasting impression. It was a humbling reminder that it's not enough to point out flaws. True courage lies in building something better. With a renewed sense of purpose, Oliver resolved to step out of the sidelines and into the arena where the real work and the real growth takes place.